This is a Sikha from Likutei Sichos, Chelek15, Parshas Vayeshev, Sikha Aleph, and the topic of the Sikha is that in this week's Parsha, we learn about what Rashi calls Yeshuvei Yaakov v'Toldosav, which is the journeys and settlements of Yaakov and his offspring, and Chazal explained with a mashal its connection to the Yeshuvei Esav v'Toldosav, which was just taught at the end of the previous Parsha, the end of Parshas Vayishlach. And there are 5 parts in the Sikha. The Rebbe, number 1, ask that the mashal doesn't seem to fit with the nimshal. Number 2, ask 2 questions on the details of the mashal. Number 3, ask about 3 changes that Rashi has in the mashal, because Rashi also brings this mashal in his Pirush on the Chumash. Number 4, explain the inner meaning of the mashal. And number 5, based on this, answer all the questions. Chazal present the mashal to explain the smichus, the juxtaposition of the beginning of Parshas Vayeshev, which relates the Yeshuvei Yaakov v'Toldosav, to the end of Parshas Vayishlach, which relates the Yeshuvei Esav v'Toldosav. And by the Toldos of Esav, it goes all the way until the kings of Edom, and even beyond that, the chieftains who came afterwards. And the mashal is of a king who had a margolis, a pearl, which was thrown among the offer and sreiris, the earth and the pebbles. The king needed to search through the offer and sreiris in order to remove the margolis from them. And when the king found the margolis, he left the offer and sreiris and busied himself with the margolis. And the same applies in our context. We cannot get to the Yeshuvei Yaakov v'Toldosav unless we first recount, at least in short, the account of the Yeshuvei Esav v'Toldosav. And we find a similar concept. This is brought all in the Medrash. The Medrash mentions this regarding the 10 generations from Adam to Noach and the 10 generations from Noach to Avram. That the Torah tells us about them, these 10 generations between Adam and Noach, and the 10 generations between Noach and Avram. It tells us about them in short. Each one had a son, and it says it very briefly. And then when he reached the pearls, which were Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, so then Hashem busied himself with them. So this is the Medrash. And we have to understand over here, because l'cha'era, seemingly the mashal doesn't fit with the nimshal. By the examples that the Medrash brings, there's the examples of the 10 generations from Adam to Noach and the 10 generations from Noach to Avram. So since there's a gap between Adam to Noach and between Noach to Avram, so therefore the Torah has to recount, at least in short, all the generations that are in between them until arriving to what's important. Like in the mashal, where the margolis is hidden in the offer, and therefore one has to search in the offer until finding the margolis. But in contrast, Yaakov is the son of Yitzchak. So why do we need to search among Esav and his offspring in order to get to Yaakov and his offspring? We could go directly from Yitzchak to Yaakov, and there's no need to go through Esav. So now we're going to support the question by negating a possible answer. So regarding the events of Esav, which did have a connection to the Yeshuvei Yaakov, like the story of the brachas of Yitzchak, so then we can say that in these areas Yaakov, which is like the margolis, the gem, is hidden and mixed in the offer, in the sand, in the dirt, the earth, and the pebbles of Esav, meaning that the Torah must relate these matters of Esav in order to get to what happened with Yaakov. And we can also explain the story of how Esav settled in Har Seir. We could explain how it is relevant to the Yeshuvei Yaakov, because only after Esav settled in Har Seir did Yaakov become the only Yerush of Eretz Yisrael. However, in addition to this not being entirely smooth, it's not entirely glatt, because the mashal speaks of the pearl being hidden in the earth, and one has to search for it because it's hidden. However, here, it's not that Yaakov is hidden in Esav, it's just that there's a connection, or at most a mixture. So it's not a good mashal. The mashal is where the margolis, the pearl, which represents Yaakov, is hidden in the earth and the pebbles. But our explanation over here is now how it is not how it's hidden, how Yaakov is hidden in Esav, but rather how there is a mixture, a connection between them. But besides for that, the question is very great, because the pasuk relates the offspring of Esav all the way until the kings of Edom, who reigned lifnei melech v'nei Yisrael, which is all the way to the times of Shalom Melech. And it then continues with the alufei Esav, the chieftains of Esav, who came even after that. So how can we say that Yaakov is even mixed with that, let alone that the Yeshuvei Yaakov v'Toldosav are hidden in that? We also need clarification about a few of the details in the mashal to understand what they mean in the nimshal. and we're going to point out two of them. Number one is, what's the offer and sreiris in the nimshal? The mashal talks about a pearl of margolis lost in offer and sreiris. What is the significance of offer and sreiris in the nimshal? And number two, why does the mashal have to say hiniach es offer? Of course, he niachas offer. Let's look at the mashal. It says mashal melech shehayule margolis mushlechas b'seicha offer uv'seicha tzreris. It's a mashal to a king who had a pearl which was thrown and lost in the earth and in the pebbles. Hutzar hamelech lefash beish ba'offer uv'tzreris. So the king had to search through the offer and the tzreris lahitzias margolis metechem in order to take the margolis out of them. And then it should have concluded kishiyagia melech lamargolis, when the king arrived and found the margolis nisasik ba. He then occupied himself with it. Why does it have to say he niachas offer of esatzreris? He put aside the offer and the tzreris. Of course, he put them aside. He was only going through them, as it says throughout the whole mashal, in order to find the margolis. To add to this, we see that Rashi also brings this mashal in his pirush on the Torah, and we know that there are inyanim of flame in Rashi. And when we look at Rashi's pirush, we see that there are a few changes. So let's see what Rashi says. Rashi says, Mashal margolis shenafla bein achel. It's a mashal to a margolis that fell into the chel, the sand. Adam mashmish bachel. A person searches in the chel, v'koivre bekvara, and he sifts it with a sifter, atchemoitze es margolis, until he finds the margolis. Umisha motza. And once the person finds the margolis, who mashlich es atzreiris, the person throws the tzreiris, the pebbles, miyade from their hand, v'neitel margolis, and they take the margolis. And so there are three differences over here, three changes that Rashi makes. Number one, Rashi says not just memashmesh bachel, similar to the medrash that says lefashvesh ba'ofer, but Rashi also adds v'koivre b'kvara, that he sifts it with a sifter. Now, even though we have this koivre b'kvara in a medrash elsewhere, but over there the whole style and the mashal is brought in a completely different way, not related to here. So it doesn't explain why Rashi takes it from there, if he even takes it from there and inserts it over here. Number two, at the beginning of the mashal, Rashi speaks about a margolis shel nafla bein hachel. It says he fell, just says chel, doesn't mention anything else. But then at the end it says that when the person finds it, mashlich es atzreiris, the person throws the tzreiris. So what's this switch from the beginning saying chel and at the end saying tzreiris? And number three, in the medrash it says that once the person finds it, then he niachas offer. The person puts aside the offer of esatzreiris, and Rashi changes it to not he niach, but rather mashlich esatzreiris. The person throws away the tzreiris. So, what is the significance of these three things in the mashal that Rashi brings? Regarding the second question, that it starts off talking about chil and it ends off talking about tzreiris, so the Maral explains that the reason it says tzreiris at the end and not chil is in order to explain why the pasuk no longer talks about the Yeshuvei Esav once it tells us and talks about the Yeshuvei Yaakov. The reason is because all the later Yeshuvei Esav aren't needed for those of Yaakov, and therefore they are like tzreiris that need to be thrown out. So it's telling us that the earlier ones are like chel, and the later ones are like tzreiris, and tzreiris have to be thrown out. However, this explanation is difficult to understand, because in addition to the fact that according to this, there isn't any chiddush in mashlichas atzreiris, there's no need even to write mashlichas atzreiris, because the idea that once he gets to the Yeshuva Yaakov V'Toldosav, he no longer speaks of the Yeshuva Esav V'Toldosav, is already understood from what it says that he searches at Shemaisei as a margolis. So it's only up to that point. So obviously, once he gets to that point that he's moitze the margolis, then he's mashlich the tzreiris. So there's no need to even write these words, mashlich as tzreiris. But in addition to that, according to this, the person never had to search by the tzreiris, because the tzreiris refers to the Yeshuvei Esav V'Toldosav that have nothing to do with the Yeshuvei Yaakov V'Toldosav. However, from Rashi, it's clear that it's also mixed with the tzreiris, because Rashi says, Misha might say, as a margolis. When the person finds the margolis, then they throw away the tzreiris, which indicates that beforehand it's mixed together. And this is also seen in the Medrash that speaks about the margolis that is mixed in offer and tzreiris. The explanation in all of this, and also answering our first question, that the whole mashal doesn't seem to fit with the nimshal, So the purpose of the Yeshuvah Yaakov V'Toldesov isn't just that Yaakov and his sons should settle in the land of Eretz Yisrael. Rather, as Yaakov told Esav, Ad Asher Avei El Adeni Sehira. And this refers to, as Rashi tells us, the fulfillment of the yiyud of the nevuah, the prophecy of Bimei Mashiach, in the days of Mashiach, of Olam Meshiyim Bartzin L'Shpeitas Har Esav. And so this is the intent of Chazal with the mashal of the Margalis. We are not primarily discussing over here the Yeshuvah Yaakov V'Toldesov on their own, which regarding them you indeed cannot say that they are hidden in the Yeshuvah Esav V'Toldesov. There isn't that type of mixture. Rather, we're talking about the ultimate goal and purpose which Yaakov has to achieve with the Yeshuvah Yaakov V'Toldesov, which is Bimei Mashiach when Ovei Seira. And since this is achieved through the Aveda in and with Yeshuvah Esav V'Toldesov, as we'll explain, so therefore it means that the ultimate goal and purpose of Yaakov is hidden in Esav, because you have to go through Esav, as we're going to explain throughout the Sikha, in order to get to the ultimate Yeshuvah Yaakov V'Toldesov, which is Bimei Mashiach. And now we could also understand why the Torah details the Yeshuvah Esav V'Toldesov, which are the kings of Edom, until the days of Shaul HaMelech. Why does it go till Shaul HaMelech? Because Shaul HaMelech was Mashiach Hashem, and if the Yidden were Zachu, they were meritorious, so then the Nevuah of Olam Meshiyim Bartzin L'Shpeitas Har Esav would have been fulfilled through him. So therefore it goes till then, because that's how it could have happened, that through Esav, as we'll see what that means, we could have went to the time of Shaul HaMelech, which is Mashiach Hashem, and it would have been fulfilled, the Nevuah of Olam Meshiyim Bartzin L'Shpeitas Har Esav, it would have been the Yemei HaMashiach. Now we're going to move on to explain what is the Aveda in and with Yeshuvah Esav V'Toldesov, and in the process we'll understand why the Mashal speaks both about Offer and Sreiris. What is the significance of Offer and Sreiris in the Nimshal, which was the second question. So this is the reason for the two elements of Offer and Sreiris in the Mashal, because there are two ways in the Bir and Mishpat of Lishbeit Es Har Esav, which is the Aveda in and with Yeshuvah Esav V'Toldesov. One is the manner in which Esav will be refined La'asad Lavi, as we find regarding a number of nations, that La'asad Lavi, they will be transformed, as it says, Ki oz epech ha'amim sofa brura, likre kulam b'shem avaya la'avdei Shechem echad. And also, as it's hinted to in the teaching of Chazal, this that Esav will be refined La'asad Lavi, it says that Asid Chazer Litar, which Chazer alludes to Edom. And then the second one is the aspect of Esav, which is Ra Gomer, and which has to be destroyed. As it says, V'hoya beis Yaakov eish, ubeis Yosef lahava, ubeis Esav is lakash, v'acholim v'lo yasari, there'll be nothing remaining of them. And this is similar to the two elements of Offer and Sreiris. Offer conceals and covers up, like in the Moshel where it covers and conceals the Margolis. However, it's not Ra Gomer. Something which conceals and covers up, it's not toiv, it's covering over it, but it's not Ra Gomer, and it can be transformed to good, to the extent that we could benefit from it, like a peel that protects the fruit, and so too over here, like it says, L'asad Lavei, when va'amdu zarim v'roit seinchem. So this is the part of the Gashmius, that even though it indeed is Gashmius, and it's a klippa, it covers up and conceals, but it's not Ra Gomer, and it can be transformed to good. And then there's Sreiris. Sreiris is not just something which conceals to the extent that we can't get any benefit from it. So it's a much greater concealment. But moreover, it's a davar mazik, as is found in Shas, by the damages of an animal, that it talks about sreiris as one of the forms of damaging, which is something that we have to destroy. So this is the Aveda in and with Yeshuvah Esav V'Toldesov. There's the parts of the world that cover and conceal. However, it's not Ra Gomer, and it could be transformed to good, and even benefit the Teiv and Kedusha. And then there's things that not only do they conceal to the extent that you can never benefit from them, but even furthermore, they are a davar mazik, and they have to be entirely destroyed. And so this corresponds to the two parts in the mashal of Offer and Sreiris, where it's talking about how do you get to the Margolis, how do you get to the Yeshuvah Yaakov V'Toldesov, which represents the coming of Mashiach. It's through Yeshuvah Esav V'Toldesov, through the Avedas HaBirurim, which has two parts to it, that of the Offer and that of the Sreiris. Now we're going to further explain the whole Aveda in and with Yeshuvah Esav V'Toldesov, and why that's what brings about the ultimate Yeshuvah Yaakov V'Toldesov, which, as we said, is the coming of Mashiach. Yaakov achieves his ultimate goal and purpose, which means the coming of Mashiach, when the promise of V'rav Yaveh Tzoyer is fulfilled through Lishpeitas Ar Esav, which is Avedis Aberurim. So the reason Bepnimius, why Esav is called the Rav, and the ultimate goal and purpose of Yaakov depends on the Rav Esav Yavid Tzoir Yaakov, meaning through Lishpeitas Ar Esav. So the reason this is the case is similar to a person needing Chai, Tzoimeach, and Daimim, which is lower than the person in order to live and do what needs to be done. Similarly, it's by Verav Yavid Sa'ir. The Sherish of Esav is higher than the Sherish of Yaakov, which therefore Esav is the Bechar, as it's explained in Kabbalah and Chassidus that the Sherish of Esav is an Eilam Atayu, which is higher than the Sherish of Yaakov, which is an Eilam Atikin. Through Yaakov being Mevar, the Nitzitz Kedusha of Tayu, which are in Esav, and he uplifts them to their Sherish, so then the level of Yaakov, which is Tikkun, is elevated as well, and it thereby achieves its ultimate goal and purpose. And this is another reason why the pasuk details the kings of Edom who reigned Lifnei Malach Melech Livnei Yisrael, because this alludes to the greatness that Yaakov reaches through the birur of Esav, as it's known that the shurish of the kings of Edom is the Malkin Kadmoin Detayu, and therefore that's why they were Malchul Lifnei Malach Melech Livnei Yisrael, because in their shurish they are higher, and therefore earlier than the Malchi Yisrael, which is the level of Tikkun. So it's through the birur of Eilam Hatayu that you get to the shleimus of Eilam Hatikkun, which will be in its completion and wholeness with the coming of Mashiach. Now we're going to continue and further talk about this idea, and we're going to talk about it in the context of a person's Avodas Hashem. And in the process, we're also going to answer question number 3. In question number 3, we asked, why does the Mashal have to say that once the king found the Margolis, he niach es ha'ofer v'satzreris v'nis asik b'margolis, that he put aside the offer and the tzreris, and he occupied himself with the Margolis. Of course he put aside the offer and tzreris. The whole purpose was in order to find the Margolis, so of course he put aside the offer and the tzreris. I should just say, once he found the Margolis, he occupies himself with the Margolis. So this is the Hira to Yidden in the time of Golus. The Yerida in Golus, and especially this last Golus of Edom, is in order to be mevar the nitzaitis that are found in physical objects. Through this, the neshama is elevated from its sherish, since the sherish of the nitzaitis are in Tayu, which is higher than the sherish of the neshama, which, as we said, is in Tikkun. And Chazal allude to the Aveda of Bir and Nitzaitis in the mashal of the Margolis, which is among the offer and Sreris. The Margolis is a mashal of the Nitzis Kedusha, which fell into the offer and Sreris, which represent, offer and Sreris, the two types of physical objects. Offer represents the physical objects which only conceal and hide the Nitzaitis Kedusha. A Yid through their Aveda is able to mimavar these Nitzaitis and elevate them to their Shirish, which simply speaking refers to all physical things, all physical objects which don't involve an Avera. And Sreris represents physical objects which are Rak Gomer, to the extent that one can extract from them through a regular Aveda, not through doing. We're not referring to if a person Chas Shalom does an Avera and then does Aveda Sachuvah. Through the regular Aveda of following what it says in Torah, a person cannot extract from them the Nitzitz Kedusha. Now they also have a Margolis, meaning a Nitzitz Kedusha, because otherwise they can't exist. However, it's in a state of total concealment. And these objects must be pushed away. So again, these are objects which involve an Avera, which a person can elevate and have to be pushed away. However, even after Higia la Margolis, before one can busy oneself with it, with the Nitzaitis Kedusha, one must first be warned that he niach has offer. That's why it says he niach has offer. There's a message over here. One must show that the physical objects on their own, if not for the Margolis, if not for the Nitzaitis Kedusha, hold no value to them. And that the reason they are busy with them is only in order to extract the Nitzaitis Kedusha, which are hidden in them. And this is the reason that he niach has offer is important for obtaining the Margolis. Like in the Marshal, it seems to imply that in order for the king to come to Vinis Asik b'Margolis, to occupy himself with the Margolis, there first has to be a special action of a niachas offer. Now we can understand why. When a person values the physical objects for what they are on their own, so then not only won't they be able to properly extract any tzaitzis from them, but moreover it can cause that the involvement of the physical will cause a descent in the neshama, a yerida in the neshama, the total opposite. Specifically when a person's eating, drinking, and all other physical matters are in a manner that the person is maniach the offer and sreris in them, the gashmi is on its own, so then they can be properly mevar the nitzaitis, and this affects a great elevation in the neshama. Now we're going to move on to answering questions 4, 5, and 6, which were the three questions on Rashi. Number 1, why does Rashi say v'kovrei bikvara? Number 2, why does Rashi start off only talking about chel and ends off only talking about tzreiris? So why does he switch from chel to tzreiris? And number 3, why does Rashi say instead of hiniach esa ofer tzreiris, he says mashlich, the person throws away the tzreiris. So according to this, we can also understand the differences found in Rashi. With this, Rashi hints in the Yenishal Torah of Rashi to the details of the Seder Avodah of Avodas HaBirurim. The main Avodah, first of all, is in Chel. That's where Rashi talks about only Chel, that the Margolis is lost in the Chel, and not in tzreiris, from which one normally is unable to extract the Nitzitz Kedusha from. Like we said, that the tzreiris represents the physical objects, which are Rak Gomer. So the Avodas HaBirurim, more specifically, is only in the Chel. And therefore, a person must first be Memashmeish Bachel. One must search in the Chel where the Margolis is found, and not in the tzreiris where it isn't found. Afterwards, a person must do a birur of the Chel, which is a mixture of Teiv and Ra. And the person is kovrei bikvara, he sifts with a sifter to completely separate between the Teiv and Ra, until one extracts the Margolis, which is the Nitzitz Kedusha, which is in it. And then Rashi concludes, as does the Medrash, with the warning of Mishamatza hu mashlichas atzreiris miyadei, that one must throw away the separated Ra. And here also, by Rashi, the remaining chel is called tzreiris, because as long as a person didn't separate the Teiv from the Ra, so then the physical objects are an entity of chel. They only conceal the nitzitz elikus. However, through kovrei bikvara, where one separates the Teiv from the Ra, one completely separates the Teiv from the Ra, so this then transforms the chel into tzreiris, because there's no longer a nitzitz kedusha in them. And then these tzreiris have to be entirely disposed of, since it no longer has any Teiv or kedusha, and it's Rak Gomer. So now we understand why Rashi starts off talking about chel, because the Avodas HaBirurim more specifically is only in chel, the physical objects which have a nitzitz kedusha which can be extracted from them. And then Rashi says at the end, tzreiris, because once the nitzitz kedusha is extracted from the physical object, then this physical object becomes like tzreiris. And once a person does it, it's not just that they're tzreiris, but it has to be mashlich. What's the lashon of mashlich? To throw it away. And avodas adam, this means that the complete birur of physical objects is only possible when one's mindset is that the physical objects on their own, so not only don't they have any value, which therefore once one finds the margolis, then he niachas offer, they put it on the side, but moreover, they are tzreiris. And therefore, meaning there's a davar amazik, something dangerous, something damaging. So therefore, immediately upon finding the margolis, so one is mashlichas atzreiris. And in the words of Chazal, that toichei ochal and klipasei zarak, that in order for it to be toichei ochal, there has to be klipasei zarak, it has to be thrown away. Because once the nitzitz kedusha is extracted from it, so not only is there no value in it, but it's a davar amazik. And so it has to be mashlichas atzreiris. Now we're going to move on to explain how this is all connected specifically to Yaakov Avinu. So the Avodah of Bir and Tzitzis primarily began with the Avodah of Yaakov. And the reason is because the main preparation for Matan Torah began through Yaakov. And as we'll see how Bir and Tzitzis is connected to the Avodah of Matan Torah. And this is also true on the simple level, that Golas Mitzrayim, which was a preparation for Matan Torah, began with the descent of Yaakov and his sons to Mitzrayim. So we see also on a simple level how the preparation for Matan Torah, which is Golas Mitzrayim, began with Yaakov. What is the accomplishment of Matan Torah that is connected to Yaakov? So the accomplishment of Matan Torah is the Amshachas Elokus, which is higher than the Elamis, drawing a level of Elokus which is higher than the Elamis into the Elamis. And it's only through this, the Amshachas Elokus, which is higher than the Elamis, into the Elamis, that the birur can be bishleimus in a way that it's mashlich esat tzreiris. This could only be accomplished through Amshachas Elokus, which is higher than the Elamis. And the reason is because compared to the air, relative to the air, which is not higher than the Elamis, but rather which is melubish in the Elamis, so then the world has significance. The world is Tefes Makim. It's an air that recognizes the world, and the world is Tefes Makim on that level. So therefore, a person can't do Bir and Tzeitzis b'shleimus in such a way that they're mashlichas atzreiris, that the Gashmis has no significance whatsoever. And this is the reason that Rashi teaches the mashal of the Margolis by Yaakov and not earlier by Noach and Avram. Although Noach and especially Avram were mavar the 10 generations that preceded them, But nevertheless, the world still remained a Metzius, and therefore Rashi doesn't bring the mashal of the Margolis, which represents the Avedus Abirim B'Shleimus by Noach and Avram. And nevertheless, at the same time, Rashi mentions the 10 generations of Noach and Avram, and in relation to the mashal of the Margolis in our parsha. So although by Noach and Avram he doesn't mention this mashal, but here where he brings the mashal by Yaakov, he mentions that the same is also true by Noach and Avram. And the reason he does this is to hint that the bir of Yaakov, which is Amshachas Elokus, which is higher than the Ilamis, in order to accomplish that you could come to a place of Mashlachas Atzreiris, could only be done specifically after the bir of Noach and Avram. So Rashi, although by Noach and Avram he doesn't mention the mashal, but he mentions them over here where he brings the mashal of the Margolis to tell us that you first need Noach and Avram to get to Yaakov. Noach achieved the bir of matters that are connected to the world. Before the Avodah of Noach, it was Mola Aretz Chamas. The world itself was corrupt. Noach accomplished that the world should be a proper world, and for this reason the curse's bris with Noach was for the existence of the world. Like it says, Oid kol yemei haaretz lo yishbaisu. So Noach brought a shleimus in the world itself. The accomplishment of Avram was Gili Elikus in the world. Like it says, Vayikra Shom b'Shem Avaya Kel Elam. But it was a level of Elikus that's connected to the world. And we can say that this is also true regarding the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, that after Avram it had to be done in a way not just for the functioning of the world, like by Noach, but also to bring Elikus into the world. And through these two, there can then be the Bir of Yaakov. The Bir of Yaakov was the preparation for Matan Torah, which accomplished that Gili Likus, which is higher than the Eilamis, should be drawn down, should be Nimshach. And this leads to the complete and full Bir of the world. So we see how this is connected specifically to Yaakov Avinu, who Yaakov was the Hachana, the main preparation for Matan Torah. In conclusion, so just like by the Avodah of Bir Netzitzis of every individual Yid, it has to be in the manner of Mishamotzo hu Mashlachas Atzreiris. So the same is true regarding Klal Yisrael. Where do we see the Avodah of Bir Netzitzis by Klal Yisrael as a whole? So the whole purpose of Galus is that Klal Yisrael does the Avodah of Bir Netzitzis in all times and places. And as it says about Galus Mitzrayim, that Va'achar Yechein Yetzer B'Chush Gadol, which refers to the Netzitzis Kedusha, which were extracted from Mitzrayim. So the Avodah of Bir Netzitzis for Klal Yisrael as a whole is referring to the whole Avodah of Galus. And therefore, once the time of Galus came to an end by Galus Mitzrayim, so since it has to be in a manner of Mishamotza, hu Mashlachas Atzreiris, so once it came to an end, meaning that we already found the Margolis, so then Hashem took us out Keherfayin. Because L'chari you could ask, what was the rush? The Shibud enslavement already ended, and the Yidden were in the best part of the land. They were in Eretz Goshen, Meitav Haaretz. So what was the rush not to remain for even another short while? And the answer is, it's because that's the Seder of Bir Netzitzis. Immediately after finding the Margolis, Misha Matzah, so we must discard the Tzreiris, who Mashlachas Tzreiris. And the same is true by the conclusion of the Birurim and the Gula from this final Galus of Galus Edom, when we'll finish the Vedas Birurim of all Galias, which it says, Ki Meitzeitcha Meretz Mitzrayim, I it flows. It'll be like Mitzrayim, that immediately when the time comes, so then Miyad Hein Nigalin, right away, all Yidden will leave all lands and come with Mashiach to Eretz Asher Eine Avaya Lekecha Ba to Eretz Yisrael in the Gula Mitzvah Shlema Bekarev Mamish.